I don't think Star Wars' most tragic story belongs to Anakin Skywalker or Obi-Wan Kenobi, but they're still a major part of it. The Star Wars franchise is full of tragic stories, famously those of Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, but its most tragic belongs to characters who were an essential part of these two JD stories. Tragedy is a key part of the Star Wars prequel trilogy, a story that details how one of the galaxy's greatest heroes fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader. Because of this, many characters were caught in the crossfire, making it a devastating time period for the galaxy as a whole. There was, however, one group in particular that was perhaps the most caught between the Galactic Republic and the Galactic Empire. These characters were quite literally created for the devastation that would result from the fall of the Republic, while unknowingly contributing to its fall in the process. They were forced to serve a system that would end up spitting them back out anyway, and had no choice in executing one of the deadliest purges in the galaxy's history. These were the men that Anakin and Obi-Wan commanded during the Clone Wars. The clones have Star Wars' most tragic story. From far before their creation through all their deaths, there's no doubt that the clones have the most tragic story in all of Star Wars. These are men who were bred for war, a war that wasn't even their own, and were given no choice in fighting that war on behalf of the Republic, under the leadership of the Jedi. Thankfully, these Jedi generals, at least most of them, treated their men well and respected the identities the clones established for themselves. But this relationship only made it more heartbreaking when Order 66 occurred. The clones certainly had no freedom, but it was even worse than anyone knew due to the secret inhibitor chips placed inside their heads. The activation of these chips is what resulted in Order 66, when the clones were forced to turn on their Jedi generals and kill them. The clones were then forced to serve the Empire that supplanted the Republic, but even that involuntary servitude didn't last for long. The Empire soon replaced the clones with conscripted soldiers known as stormtroopers, and the lack of protection in place for clones left them abandoned and displaced. Anakin and Obi-Wan unfortunately played right into their tragedy. These other two tragic figures, Anakin and Obi-Wan, unfortunately played right into the clone troopers' tragedy all the while. As Jedi generals during the Clone Wars, with Anakin leading the 501st Legion and Obi-Wan leading the 212th Attack Battalion, both Anakin and Obi-Wan led these men into many different battles. As the highest points in their respective chains of command, they also no doubt partook in the discipline of clone troopers who tried to find a way out as well, even if they had sympathies for those men. They weren't contributing to these men's suffering intentionally, but it doesn't minimize the role they played in this greater tragedy. Anakin and Obi-Wan were two of the most ideal men to have as leaders during the Clone Wars, seeing as they became quite close with their men and tried to save as many of their lives as possible. This is especially true when remembering that there were Jedi generals as cruel as Pong Krell, the basilisk who fell to the dark side and purposefully killed off as many clones as possible with his reckless tactics on Umbara. They weren't contributing to these men's suffering intentionally, but it doesn't minimize the role they played in this greater tragedy. Hopefully more than a handful of clones got a happy ending. Thankfully, there are some clones whose stories didn't end in complete tragedy, even if they did still suffer greatly along the way. We know that Rex, Wolf, and Gregor survived together into the Age of Rebellion, with Rex even surviving long enough to see the Battle of Endor. Most recently, we learned that Clone Force 99, Bartek and Echo were able to live a peaceful life on the island Pabu after freeing Omega and the clone prisoners from Mount Tantus, with Omega eventually leaving to participate in the Rebel Alliance. As of right now, these are the closest things we have to happy endings for any of the clones, but hopefully these aren't the only cases. Many of the clone prisoners from Tantus were taken to the planet Pantora, where they were likely able to live out their lives in peace under the protection of Senator Ryo Chuchi, who was known as an advocate for the clones. There are still rumblings of a clone rebellion in Star Wars, and while we know they couldn't have been completely successful, I hope they managed to free even more of their brothers.